international level on the voice. Thank you, Elmer, for sharing that. My daughter plays guitar, but she doesn't play it left-handed and upside down like Elmer does. That's pretty amazing. That is a great example of what we've just witnessed over the last 15 minutes of stress management through music. That is one of the key principles of reprogramming the stress response. We actually are able, through what we just did, if you kind of engage with that music, if you let it touch your soul, it is literally epigenetically changing the way your genes work, literally turning on the good genes and turning off the bad genes. There's going to be many examples that we go through quickly today and also address this afternoon and early this evening. But we have literally the opportunity available to us to master our genetic risk with lifestyle and nutritional medicine. And when we say lifestyle medicine, we're looking at every aspect that is medicinal to our soul, meaning the totality, soul is the totality of physical, emotional, social, and spiritual. That we have the opportunity to master that genetic risk. So I have had the privilege over the last 10 years to actually help people understand how their unique genetic inheritance influences their risk of disease, influences how they respond to all kinds of different stressors in their lives. In fact, there are several genes that I actually spend a whole hour going over through a genetic report with patients. We actually use the 23andMe platform, but then through thousands of hours of studying this new language of genetics that is brand new. It's only been since 2003 since the scientists have decoded the entire human genome. The entire field of science and medicine is now moving into the realm of how to influence the gene. Forget about killing the bacteria, but how do we influence the genes in our bodies to create what we want to happen? And so music, thank you, Art and Susan, for your contribution to my stress management and our stress management today. I love all your songs, but one of the ones that I hadn't sung it for, 20 years. But, love him in the morning, but love him in between times when you feel the pressure rising. Wow, was that appropriate? Thank you for doing your research, Art, putting that together. There's in between times, in other words, all day long, we feel the pressure rising at times. What do you do about that? Are we victims of stress, or we can rise above that as we are now being told by professors of genetics all around the world, is that we can learn to be masters of our genome. We literally can control the way our genes work. No longer are we victimized because we have the Alzheimer's gene. And 25% of you in this room have at least one copy of the ApoE4 Alzheimer's gene. Do you know that about 70% of this in this room have at least one major gene that predisposes us to diabetes? And hence, that's why we're here, Pastor Phil and Pastor Pam. We're here because we are wanting to learn how to be able to control that through understanding the influences in our environment and how we can make the best choices possible. Why are we doing this here in this church setting? Because we as a church here believe, as the disciple John, the disciple that Jesus it was especially fond of. You know, we all have individuals in our lives that, you know, we love everybody, or at least that's the task for us, to love everybody. But there's some people that we just really like to be around. And that John was one of those individuals that people really love to be around him. And he in particular says this to us. He said, "Beloved, I wish above all things that you would prosper, okay, and be in good health, even as your soul prospers." So our physical health, our emotional health, our mental health is equally as important to our spiritual health. Why? Because that's where spiritual health grows from. Okay, we need to pay attention to all these factors because they have a huge influence on changing the way our genes work, which actually determine our willingness to accept and even begin to understand the power of optimal, healthy spirituality in our lives. So, last night, how many were here last night? About half of you. Good. All right. So a little review for you, but this might be new for some of you. The exposome is everything in our lives that influences the transformation or the change of our genes, how our genes interact with each other to impact our current state of physical, mental, emotional, and social health. And I'm not just saying that. I'm going to show you research that shows how each of those things actually happen. So our exposome, in short, is everything that we do, everything that we eat, everything that we drink, everything that we say. Do the things we say influence our health? Everything that we hear. Everything that we hear, the words that others speak to us, the songs that we listen to, all that has a huge influence on genetic expression. Everything that we think, all the thoughts that we constantly mull over from day to day, hour to hour, everything in our environment, all of that constitutes our exposome. And so that is really why this church, in about a week, is starting this Diabetes Undone program, because in that program, we learn not just the principles for undoing diabetes, but the principles for undoing any chronic disease or any risk that you and I might have a chronic disease that helps change the expression of our genes and literally reprogram the stress response. One of the reasons that so many of us, myself included, struggle with certain challenges in our life is because we haven't learned how to effectively reprogram that stress response. And so we take advantage of choices in a way, we make choices in a way that are actually bad for us. Temporarily, we get some benefit from it. That's why we choose it. But we know that while we get temporary benefit, we actually are going to suffer a much more significant setback because of participating in that behavior. So how do we reprogram our stress response? Is this part of our exposome? I think probably it's been part of our exposome. Almost everybody, including myself, at times, this has been part of our exposome, the impact. Or is this a part of your exposome? Nutrition is one major factor that has a huge influence on literally how our genes work. You see the colors represented on this slide? It's actually the colors, the very pigments that make up these deep reds and oranges and yellows and greens and so forth. The very pigments that make up those colors in these fruits and vegetables are actually the chemicals that pharmacologically, that medicinally actually change the way your genes work. It literally activates the genes that bring healing to the body, And it can also deactivate the very genes that bring disease to the body. That's why nutrition is such a critical piece of our exposome, of the factors that can transform our genetic risk. There's a whole, we are all subject to choices, right? We all have choices, and I know I've made these choices before. Sometimes I've made the right choice, and yes, sometimes I've made the wrong choice. We all struggle with choices like this, and this visual, having a donut on one hand and or an apple available to us on the other hand. What are we going to choose to finish off this meal? Okay, what are we going to choose when we really need some nourishment? That quick energy, or something that is not only quick energy but lasting energy as well? So this brings up the whole new field of science and medicine called nutrigenomics. The actual power of nutrients, of nutrition, on changing the expression of our genes. And therefore, what we eat literally alters our behaviors. It alters the way we think about the choices we have the rest of the day. And I'll show that to you. There is a relationship between genetics and cancer. I'm here speaking before you today because when I was 10 years old, my mother died of cancer. And I remember saying to myself when I was working with my father one day when I was 13, I asked him, Dad, why did Mom have to die of cancer? And I remember he didn't know what to say to his 13-year-old son. What do you say? Why did Mom die of cancer? And I was very interested in the answer to that because I knew that somehow that would come back to me in the future. And I wanted to better understand how the body worked. And he didn't say, we were raking leaves, and he just leaned on his rake and was looking down the road far away. And I remember saying, Dad, I wish I knew right now what my risks are. So I could start working on reversing that risk, on reprogramming that response genetically in my body right now. And that was the beginning of my passion for not only helping myself understand my risk, but helping others understand it as well. So there's a very strong relationship between this. The question is, can I actually modify how my genes work enough so it actually influences my risk of cancer? And the answer is absolutely yes. And here's a study that was actually published by Dr. Dean Ornish 11 years ago, 2008. And he basically took a group of relatively young men, middle-aged men who'd been diagnosed with prostate cancer. A very common cancer, unfortunately. I have a lot of patients right now that I'm working with who are dealing with prostate cancer. And so he recognized that a lot of people who have prostate cancer, there's this controversy. What do we do? We learned that being aggressive in managing prostate cancer with surgical and other means actually made the patient worse, actually decreased their quality of life significantly. And so in the last 10 years, last 15 years in particular, we've had this concept called watchful waiting. Well, they said, rather than jump in there and mess things up, let's just kind of watch this and make sure it's not aggressive. Well, rather than just standing back and not doing anything and hoping for the best without doing anything that actually changes the expression in the expression of the genes themselves, Dr. Ornish says, why don't we do 4 major lifestyle intervention practices with these men while they're just waiting to see what to do and see what happens. And so they put them on a 100% plant-based diet. They put them on daily moderate exercise, nothing fancy. They just make sure they do some walking or some type of exercise on a daily basis, average of about half hour a day. Stress management techniques were key. In fact, talking to Dr. Ornish at multiple points over the last 30 years, he has said over and over to me and to the groups he speaks to, said the most important strategy is learning how to reprogram the stress response. Now, what's interesting here is that when somebody comes to me and they want to stop smoking, why would somebody with today's amount of knowledge of the impact of smoking on health, why would they smoke? There's still a lot of people that smoke and more that are vaping, right? So why would people do that? And the answer is because it actually does something good for them. That's the only reason we do anything is because we're getting some benefit from it. The problem is that benefit is then followed by a curse, a significant setback in health. And so I never take away something good or something that's at least perceived as good from a patient until I have something better for them. Or you don't just tell somebody, what are you stupid? Why are you drinking? Why are you smoking? No, you don't do that. You basically give them something better. And so you know what I do? In my practice, when somebody comes to me and they say, hey, doc, I really want to stop smoking, you know what the first thing I say? We start talking about their stress response. And then I gently help educate them about the power of nutrition in genetically, epigenetically modifying the stress response. It says, wouldn't it be great if you had such an improvement in how you felt, if you had such an improvement in your stress response that you wouldn't have to rush over to get another cigarette or vape another e-cigarette? He goes like, oh man, that'd be awesome. And that's why we bring in the other pillars of lifestyle medicine: nutrition, exercise, sleep, pillars that we emphasized last night. So I'm not going to go into those in great detail at the moment. But sometimes they get upset and go like, wait a minute, I came here to stop smoking, not to change my diet. And I go like, time out. And I smile and I says, but here's the point. Unless we find a real solution to the underlying problems, health problems that you have, you're probably not going to be successful in smoking cessation. And as they begin to involve their family in this program, they start seeing the powerful benefits that a plant-based diet, properly done, can have on actually providing stress management. And then the fourth thing that Dr. Ornish did is they provided a weekly support group where people were able to open up about their challenges. They were able to discuss what concerns them. And when we're able to release some of that stress through talking with people who are willing to listen to us, there's an amazing thing that happens. There is a transformation that actually occurs at the genetic level where healing starts to take place. Not just physically, but also emotionally, mentally, and socially as well. So there was some people go like, well, that's a nice theory, but show me some proof that this is actually real. There was Dr. Ornish's research that was published in a very respected medical journal, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of the most prestigious organizations scientifically in the world. Says that for 3 months, Dr. Ornish had his patients either they elected not to do this or they elected to do it. And for 3 months, those who decided we were going to engage, right, Pastor Phil, we were going to engage in a community that was interested in improving my health, they discovered that the initial baseline testing that they did, they found that there was 48 disease-preventing genes that had been turned off initially were now all turned back on after just 3 months on the program. Now, after I've actually talked with Dr. Dean Ornish about this, and this was done 11 years ago. We knew this 11 years ago, that you can literally turn off the 48 best-known genes that are known to prevent a disease that had been turned off. In other words, they weren't preventing anything. They were allowing bad things to happen in the body, were now after 3 months turned on. And now we have all of these 48 healers working on our behalf, basically doing their internal genetic magic to heal the body. We now know that that actually begins to happen within a day or two of making positive choices. Very, very powerful. That they also found, so basically, like, think of this like a dimmer switch. These health-promoting genes were now much more active. They were transforming health. What they also found, though, is that there were over 400 genes, 453 genes precisely, which were known at the time to promote cancer, to promote chronic diseases, like breast cancer, etc., and had been all turned on at the beginning of the study, at that baseline sample that they did before they did these 4 major interventions. Now they were all dramatically turned back in the off position. So hundreds and hundreds of genes that were known to cause cancer and serious disease were active. They were determining our fate. We were marching without realizing it more and more towards progression of this disease. Now we're turned off. So Dr. Ornish was one of the first physician researchers to show us that there was this powerful activation determined by the choices that we make multiple times every day. But is this part of our exposome? You know, we spent 3 hours driving here last night, or yesterday afternoon rather, in order to make it for our meeting, and we got in just about 6 o'clock. And we hear reports every day on the radio about road rage, okay? And sometimes we feel a little bit of that ourselves, don't we? I mean, let's be honest. I had a patient just recently. I was giving a conference for physicians at Weimar Institute earlier this summer, and one of the lay people that had attended the conference, he came up to me and he says, there are times, and he was this meek, wonderful, easy to talk to person, and he confided in me that one afternoon he was behind this truck, and the only problem of being behind this truck was that the person driving the truck had forgotten to turn their signal off. Something that I am guilty of. As I get older, I lose my hearing, and I can't hear that little click, or I just drown it out. And so I have to be reminded by my wife or my family members, hey, turn the turn signal off. Well, so this turn signal was blinking in front of him, and he told me, says, I became so upset. I became so angry that this is exactly what he told me, that if I had had a gun, I would have pulled over and shot him. Now, that might seem to be, and I hope it is an extreme example. I hope that we don't experience that at the same level. But this is a fine, elderly Christian gentleman who experienced this significant hostility. And you know what the reason was? The reason was that he had not eaten lunch yet. It was early afternoon, and he had had a dramatic crash in his blood sugars. And we demonstrated that with testing later. It's clear to me. I see many patients in my office that actually have dramatic crashes in their blood sugar, and people laugh about it. So, oh, be careful around so-and-so, because when they don't get lunch on time, if they don't get fed on time, really watch out. And I mean, it can be really serious. Not only do we tend to get really moody, but we can actually become violent. I have a story that I could tell you about myself. I will tell you this because I'm a pretty easygoing type of guy. And back 28 years ago, Pastor Phil, I was living in Loma Linda at the time. This is before we went to Guam. And I was working in San Diego at the Ocean Beach Medical Group 3 days a week. So I would drive down on Monday, and then I would come back on Tuesday evening, and then go back Thursday and come back Thursday evening. This was when the 15 freeway there was doing a lot of construction on it. This was before the 215 freeway even was created, and the traffic going north from San Diego in the evening after work would just be horrendous. I mean, we'd be stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic for miles, and every once in a while, somebody would get over on the shoulder and literally drive for miles and then want to cut in. Well, for those of us who, believe in justice, right? After a while, that really it just gets to you. At least it did for me. And because this was after a long day of working with patients. And by the way, I had, my first year working with patients, I was thinking so hard and wanting to make sure I didn't make any mistakes and making sure that I helped my patients in every way. One night, about 6 o'clock, my nurse came into my office there in Ocean Beach Medical Group and says, Doctor, why? You don't look very good. And I go like, what? What do you mean I don't look very good? He says, well, you just don't, you want me to check your blood sugars. Like I'm the one that asked for people's blood sugars to be checked. So I said, okay, well, she's obviously concerned about me, so sure. And this was before we had the portable little, mobile devices. And so she actually had to draw my blood, spin it down in her little lab, and she came back to me, and she was like white. She said, Dr. Youngberg, your blood sugar's 32. I mean, my blood sugar was crashing. You know why? Because my brain was working so hard. My brain was just sucking up all that carbohydrate and glucose that I'd had a good lunch. But that lunch can only last so long if your brain's working overdrive. The brain uses more energy than any other single organ most of the day. 25% of the glucose and carbohydrate in your body is used by your brain, and that's on a normal day. So just I think if you're really working hard, if you're studying hard, if you're really working on challenging tasks. So bottom line is I'm driving and I see car after car driving for miles. Well, I just spent 20 minutes trying to make that distance for 2 miles, and they're just bypassing all that and then trying to cut in, right? And so I purposed within my heart that I wasn't going to enable this unjust behavior on the part of other people. And so right as I had done that, out of the corner of my eye, I see this car trying to inch in front of me. And I just moved right up like this. I wasn't going to let that person cut in front of me. And as I did that, I noticed the motion of the person driving, and it just automatically caused me to turn and look at that person. And this person was going like this, like, why, and so I automatically did like, what do you mean? You're the one that's trying to cut in. And as I did that, I recognized her as my friend who I had done biochemistry with at Loma Linda University several years before. I tell you this because I was so shocked by that and so incapable, apparently, of making a good decision at that moment that I just turned back and looked ahead and never looked back at her. And that's the last time I've seen her. Are you in the audience, by the way? I tell this story hoping that I could say, I'm sorry, I was an idiot. So that's my experience with road rage. And at that point, Pastor, I purposed in my heart I would never do that again. That was so embarrassing to me that I had acted like a fool and basically presented myself to somebody that I knew was a very good person. I don't know why she was trying to cut in. I just assumed she had that she was doing it unjustly, and maybe she was, but I did not like the way I felt about that situation. So the bottom line is that this is a huge part, potentially of our exposome that changes the way our genes work. We need to be very careful how we use our responses to various situations in our lives. So there's a wonderful quote. As I grew up and as I was seeking to learn more about how the body worked, one of my favorite chapters in my favorite book, The Ministry of Healing, is the chapter that's called Mind Cure. Brilliant. This was a chapter titled Mind Cure over 100 years ago. And this is one of my favorite passages from that chapter called Mind Cure. It says, the relationship that exists between the mind and the body is very intimate. When one is affected, the other sympathizes. The condition of the mind affects the health to a far greater degree than many realize. What the author here is pointing out is that how we choose to think has the biggest influence on our physical and emotional health, and ultimately our spiritual health as well. We have to be masters of how we think. We need to learn to control how we think, because if we don't, we cannot be truly healthy. We cannot truly reach the optimal potential for health or healing. And so the author goes on to say, many of the diseases from which men and women now suffer are the result of mental depression, of grief, of anxiety, of discontent, remorse, guilt, distrust, all tend to break down the life forces and to invite decay and death. Okay, and that happens. These are thoughts. These are thoughts that are transformative, that have a bigger power on our health than anything else. Disease, she says, is sometimes produced and is often greatly aggravated by the imagination, what we let control our thinking. Many are lifelong invalids who might be well if they only thought so. Many imagine that every slight exposure will cause illness, and the evil effect is produced because it is expected. Many die from disease, the cause of which is wholly imaginary. So that's a powerful introduction of this concept. I'm going to go right past this one because is there a connection then between what we eat and our emotions? Let me share with you some interesting studies on this. A few years ago, in 2002, what I believe is one of the best ever done double-blind, placebo-controlled studies was done in England in a group of young, violent men who had been incarcerated. They were now in the Department of Corrections. They were in prison because of their violent behaviors. And so researchers decided that they were going to come up with a study that would determine whether or not certain specific nutrients or minerals had an impact on thinking and the expression of hostile behavior, on hostility. And what they found was that, and I would have never developed a study like this. I would have thought, well, we got to do everything, right? But all they did, this is again, none of the inmates even knew what they were getting. Some of them were getting a placebo pill, nothing, and others were getting just some vitamins and minerals in particular. We talked about this last night, and omega-3 fats, these essential fats, EPA and DHA, that very few of us have enough of. Okay, and in an average of just 5 months, these inmates committed 35% violent or hostile acts. The researchers and the managers of the prison said that they had never seen anything like this. No other stress management program, no other anger management program, no discipline, no solitary confinement. Nothing else had ever worked this well on violent offenders. In other words, we need to actually address the cause of the problem that actually influences how the genes work, that literally change the way we think about things. And when the last time we've had a major argument with somebody, maybe maybe we should start thinking about, is there something that I'm doing in my life? Is there some other choice I'm making that is predisposing me to have this argument? Is there something that is creating this change of mood in my heart and my soul? So this is a very powerful study, and this is why Hippocrates is well known for saying, let food be your medicine, and medicine be your foods. He wasn't just saying that to be cute, right? He was saying that because as an astute philosopher and as an astute scientist and as an astute healer, he saw that people who made the right choices nutritionally had a powerful influence on every other factor in their lives. That is why it is such a key part of what we're doing with the Diabetes Undone program that is available to everybody starting next week right here at this church. So, but Hippocrates, where did he get this information? I know, I'm certain that Hippocrates read Genesis, okay, the beginning of all things, where on Genesis 1 it says, and God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, and to you it shall be for food. And so the original diet was 100% plant-based diet, no question. So it's also true that our choices have a dramatic impact on all disease, including autoimmunity. I work with a lot of patients who have serious autoimmune disease, rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or even just dry eye syndrome or Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And there's so many different types of autoimmune disease. And what researchers have found is that the first and most important thing that we need to address, not only as a preventive measure, but also as the main therapeutic intervention, is to reprogram the stress response. We have to learn to do that because as I work with patients and they're coming in with an autoimmune disease, I know that sometime in the year or two prior to their diagnosis, they had gone through what researchers refer to an uncommon level of emotional stress. It's not just, things didn't go my way today, but, this is chronic, just serious levels of stress that last for not just days, but weeks and months and longer. And that is a dramatic transformative factor on our genes that literally turns on the bad genes and turns off the healing genes. So that's why we need to learn how to effectively reprogram the stress response. Okay, so what's important to understand is that we all have some tendency towards hostility. And hostility has three major elements. I've always thought of myself as the peacemaker. My best two friends in high school were arch enemies. They hated each other. And I was always trying to, come on guys, let's get along and do stuff together. But they're my two best friends and they hated each other. And so I was always trying to bring them together. So I was the peacemaker in the family, the peacemaker with my friends. But when I actually started studying my emotional health about 30 years ago, as I started working with patients, I realized that while I did not have a problem with aggression, the behavior of hostility, I did not necessarily have a problem with anger, the emotion. I kind of, went with the flow and found ways to deal with my issues effectively. But what I did discover is I actually scored high on the form of hostility we refer to as cynicism. And that is the attitude of hostility. The attitude of hostility creates thoughts that changes our genes for the worse. And so I needed to come to grips with the fact that I needed to change my level of hostility. Real briefly, An example of that would be running into the grocery store, and I just need to get 2 items. I run to the proper rows, grab it, and I'm running back to the checkout counter, knowing that I'm going to go to the express counter, and knowing that there's a rule that everybody should follow, that should never be more than 12 items in your cart when you go through the express checkout counter. And as I'm running to the counter, I'm seeing the people in front of me, and I'm counting to see how many items they have. That's hostility. That's cynicism. Okay? And I had to come to grips with that. There was other examples I could give you about myself. And so doctors at University of North Carolina actually discovered, working with medical students, that as they did the test their senior year of medical school, those who actually scored on the personality inventories in the upper half of the class of having cynicism or anger or aggression, they were 5 times more likely to develop heart disease by age 50 than those who scored low on the scale. So, in other words, how we view the world around us and how we relate to each other emotionally is a much bigger contributor to our health than anything else. And so, but the point that we're raising is that there's other things that influence eating the right foods and exercising properly and engaging in communities like semi-fit. All these strategies are critical in improving our health. But this study showed that they were 7 times more likely to have died from all causes simply because they had more cynicism or aspects of hostility in how they think about life around them. Wow, so that was doctors. Well, let's not just pick on doctors. Okay, well, how about lawyers? Okay, lawyers, it was found the same thing happened. Lawyers, I should have. Okay, so what you see here is that those lawyers, that the percentage of lawyers that died by age 50, okay, from complications, was only 4% for those who had good scores of hostility. They weren't hostile. But if they had more cynicism, if they had more hostility, 20%, 1 out of 5 of those lawyers was dead by age 50. Okay, so that's an important concept. Okay, so I want to finish up with a couple things. We talked about Dr. Dean Ornish in his study on showing how nutrition and exercise and stress management had such a powerful effect in transforming genetic expression. His best book, and in my opinion, his best contribution to the science of lifestyle medicine was the book entitled Love and Survival. It's an amazing book where he brings out key principles, which I know many of you in this community are understanding and starting to engage in and participate in your own lives and as you work together. The studies report that in those individuals who live amongst us, who live near us, or that we work with, if they have feelings of isolation, if they have feelings of rejection for any reason, they're at least 2 to 5 times at higher risk of premature death from all causes. Now, here's the clincher that I want us to concentrate on. In other words, people who feel isolated and rejected, that is a bigger risk factor to their health and long life than smoking, alcohol consumption, inactivity, overeating, and all other unhealthful practices combined. So that's why the most important thing that we can do as a community, okay, is engage each other, is to make sure that no one is left behind, make sure that no one is left to themselves where they feel isolated, where they feel unloved or rejected. And once we do that, and once we engage in a way where we're seeing the benefits of optimal nutrition and optimal lifestyle and exercise, that's when healing can take place at a much, much higher level. So let me just end with this last story. We had actually in our programs, this is when I was living in Guam, and my wife and I were practicing, we were medical missionaries in Guam. We spent 14 years living there, raising our children there. It was a wonderful time for our family. And I would do evening programs, much like what you're doing at Simi Valley, Simi Fit programs here in the community. And one of the things that we did, Pastor Phil, is that we would actually hand out that questionnaire that dealt with hostility. I didn't do it initially. You know, we'd start with cholesterol and blood sugars and everything else. And by the way, all this type of stuff is addressed in the Diabetes Undone program, or at least the initial aspects of it. And so about 3 months into our program, we actually had everybody do the questionnaire like I had done years before, and learned a lot about myself, what made me tick and what made me healthy or not so healthy. And Nancy in particular, this is not her, but this is a model pretending to be Nancy. She was planning on retiring in a few years from teaching, and she wanted to travel the world, but she had arthritis, she had high blood pressure, and she was starting to think, I'm not going to be able to travel at all. So she joined our program in our community to improve her health. And everything improved. She started reversing she reversed her prediabetes completely. She reversed her hypertension. She got off all her medications. Her arthritis went away. She was so excited about how much better she was doing. She was looking forward to her retirement when she was going to be able to travel the world. And then she took her questionnaire that looked at cynicism, anger, and aggression. And I remember as I gave them 20 minutes to fill out this questionnaire, I remember her looking at her, and she just after we graded it independently, nobody knew whatever anybody else's score was, she let it fall to the table. And she put her hands to her face like this. And I knew that she would be talking to me later that evening. And as we let the group go back home that evening, we would have a plant-based meal there together, and then we'd talk about different things that impacted her health. And she came up to me at the end of the evening. She said, Dr. Youngberg, can I talk with you? I said, of course you can talk to me. And I could see tears in her eyes. And she said, this discussion that we have just had today, and this test, this risk factor assessment that we just went through, is by far the most challenging thing that I have ever done, because it has challenged me to the core. And let me tell you a quick story. She said, over 20 years ago, actually this is almost 30 years ago, I decided that my best friend and I decided that we were going to build houses right next to each other. We were going to raise our families together, and we went on every vacation together, and we raised our family. And about the time that our kids were teenagers, one night, my very best friend, I was at her home, and we were just talking like we always do, because we're just very best friends. And I said something about her teenage son that so infuriated my best friend that actually, I'm sorry, it was the other way around. This other friend said something about my teenage son that was so, upset me so much, I said to her, get out of my house. I don't want to ever see you again. You never talk about my son like that. And she tried to calm me down, and I said, get out of my house. And she kind of backed away with tears in her eyes and started getting upset herself, and walked to the door, the side door of the house, walked down the steps, across the lawn to her side door, walked in the door, and that's the last time I've seen her. I've looked into her eyes. And we have lived together across from each other, next door to each other for the last 30 years. But we haven't talked to each other once since then. Every time one of us is taking the trash cans out to the corner and we see the other, we turn our shoulders and turn away and walk off. Every time we pull into the driveway and somebody's on the front lawn, both of us quickly go into our houses and close the shades. There's no communication between these two houses. She says, Doc, it's been 30 years. What can I do? I said, Nancy, I think you know what you need to do. He says, no, I didn't even tell her what to do. He said, no, she knew what she needed to do. No, I cannot do that. I said, Nancy, that's the only answer. The only way you can reprogram your stress response right now, the worst thing that's been happening to your health over the last 30 years is your unwillingness to deal with this huge emotional challenge in your life. Because I challenged everybody in that group that night, says that we all have individuals in our lives that are just minutes away from confronting with a phone call and just being open and honest. I've been there. I know I got to call somebody up and I just can't sleep. I'm stressed. I don't know. I'm going to sound like a fool. If I bring it up, they're going to make me feel like an idiot. And I already feel like an idiot. I can't address this. I don't know how, emotionally or otherwise. And I said to Nancy, I said, Nancy, unless you're willing to feel like a fool and to be embarrassed about this as you bring it up with your friend, this is never going to go away. And she realized that forgiveness was and seeking forgiveness and asking for forgiveness and giving for forgiveness is the most important wellness remedy there is on the face of this earth. She realized she had to do it. And so I said, Nancy, can I pray with you? We're almost done with this. And of course, that's what she desperately wanted. She just needed some type of spiritual, emotional support. So I prayed with her. I said, Nancy, you have to deal with this now, not later. You have to deal with this now. So she went home that night, and she was so stressed she couldn't sleep. She walked over to that screen door many times, grabbed it, and just couldn't do it. She just couldn't do it. And so that late evening after the group, she went for a walk, which was her habit, going for a walk several times a day, and she had found a neighborhood health partner to go on walks with her. So that evening, she went with a different neighbor lady that will live down the road and went walking with her because, the neighbor lady came to the door and knocked and said, Nancy, it's time for a walk. And she said, I don't want to walk. I feel horrible. She says, no. You told me that you made me promise that I would force you to go on a walk with me, that walking is not an option. We got to do it every day. So Nancy decided not to argue and went for a walk. She couldn't help but tell her friend about what had just happened. And of course, her friend and everybody else in the neighborhood and the city around her knew about this 30-year feud between these two past very, very best friends. And so her friend just listened, encouraged her, didn't tell her what to do. That night was just the worst night of Nancy's life because she just couldn't bring herself to make that step towards her past friend. The next morning, she hears a knock at the door. It's my friend again who wants to go walking. I don't feel like going walking. I feel horrible. She opened the door and said, I don't really want to go walking. And she stopped because next to her friend, just behind her friend that she walked with, was her past very best friend. And for the first time in 30 years, they're looking eye to eye. And they're both starting to tear up. And of course, her walking partner is smiling. And it says, look who I've found who wants to go walking with us today. And Nancy, she told me that next day, She says she walked down those 3 steps and reached out to her past very best friend, who also stepped towards her. They hugged, and they cried on each other's shoulder, and they both apologized profusely for being so stubborn that they would withhold love from each other for 30 years. And they had that cathartic moment. It wasn't embarrassing at all in their situation, because they had both rekindled the friendship that had been lost for 30 years. That is the power of forgiveness. And so I'll read this final quote. Forgiveness is the only prescription in the entire universe that is powerful enough to unlock the chemical bonds of hostility, resentment, and bitterness. It is the most powerful medicine. Forgiveness is essential for healing of our emotions. It is the best way to reprogram our stress response. Let's pray. Father, we are grateful for the experience of Nancy, who recognized, even after 30 years of struggling with unforgiveness, that forgiveness was available as long as she was willing to act. Thank you that we have people in our community that can bring us together, that can give us the tools and the insights to improve our health. I just pray that you bless this community here in Simi Valley. I pray, Lord, that you will bless each person and family represented here. And as they have been touched by the power of forgiveness, I pray that you heal their hearts. Heal my heart, Lord. Give us the power and the willingness to seek forgiveness and to give it out again. In Jesus' name.